Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Court is now live in the George Burch trial. This may be the final day of the prosecution's case, and these are critical witnesses who are about to testify today. On the stand right now, a sergeant who is going to be talking about cell phone records, most importantly, the defendant's cell phone records. The goal, to link him to the crime scene and implicate him. Let's go back live into the courtroom.
Latitude in that Excel spreadsheet.
When Google provided the data to you, did they also provide a certification
Yes, they did.
as to the authenticity of the data itself?
Yes.
Did you receive the information from Google in a paper format?
No, I received it via email, so electronically.
And what did you do with it when you received it?
I downloaded the data, made a disk of it to be turned into evidence at the sheriff's office, and then I also downloaded the data so I could review it.
Sergeant Loughnane, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 158. Can you identify that?
This is the letter I received when I received the information from Google regarding that information that was sent to me.
And 159, can you identify that for the jury as well?
159 is the certificate of authenticity that I received also from Google regarding the information.
And what is Exhibit 160, Sergeant?
Exhibit 160 is a DVD disc containing that information that I received from Google.
And you put the information on that disk?
Yes, I did.
And you believe it's a true and accurate copy of the information that you received directly from Google?
Yes.
I would move for the admission of those exhibits, Your Honor.
Any objection to 158, 159, and 160 subject to cross?
No.
Can I see 158 and 159, please?
All right, as the judge reviews that paperwork there, I'm sitting here with probably the nation's foremost expert on this trial, Jesse Weber, who's been covering this from day one. Jesse, what's the significance of this?
I believe this is going to track where George Burch was in the night in question, and we know that his cell phone is going to pinpoint him in 4 key locations. 1, the crime scene, basically outside of her house. 2, where Nicole's body was found in that field. And also, it should be noted, where her purse and clothing were found on the opposite side of the highway. Now, why would a guy who didn't have anything to do with this be tracked in those 4 locations? Well, that's not a problem, because the defense is saying even though he was in those locations, it matches up to their story, that he was with Nicole that night and that he was forced to dispose of the body.
But they still want to be able to definitively link him to the crime scene, which is what they're doing now. Let's go back into the courtroom live. Let's be clear, some of this is controversial testimony. It's not controversial to use the cell phone records as to where he was, but the Fitbit evidence, which we're expecting today, is very controversial. It was a long, hard-fought battle over what evidence would be admitted, but that's not with regard to George Burch, the defendant. That's with regard to the boyfriend who Burch is pointing the finger at.
Exactly, exactly. That's what makes this case so unique and why everybody's following it, because Fitbit data, they're going to be tracking his step counting data. How many steps did he take? And did the amount of steps that he took, does that link him to the crime? Could he have taken that many steps, or could he track him somewhere else?
Because the point is that according to the defense, there was a huge, like a fight, right? I mean, he's basically knocking him out, then forcing him at gunpoint to go, bring a body somewhere. And Dietrich's position is that the boyfriend, I was sleeping when this happened.
What's great is, okay, everybody wears a Fitbit, and it's on you 24/7. So it's going to monitor how many steps you took and where you are. Now, the thing is, he can't escape that data. So I'm just going to make up a number. If he took 600 steps when taking this journey to really kill Nicole takes 2,000 steps, that's a good indicator of where he was. The sleep counting data when he was resting it's not admissible.
Yeah.
And the defense didn't want any of it in, but at least they were able to not get the sleep counting data, so we don't know when he was resting with the Fitbit.
Right. Can we take another look at the live courtroom? So again, this is critical evidence. Let's be clear. This is a really important point in this case. This is the end of the prosecution's case. These is going to be their last few witnesses. And the goal is, A, link the defendant to the crime scene, and B, demonstrate the guy they're pointing the finger at couldn't have done it.
Exactly. It's great using technology in a courtroom. Now, cell phone evidence, we've been seeing that for years now. It's a great indicator of where someone was. It's still controversial. You still hear the other side try to deny its reliability. But the Fitbit data, this is a novel issue. And you wonder, in 5 years from now, are we going to look back at this case and say, oh, you remember how controversial it was trying to pinpoint where somebody was or what steps they took? But people are using new technology, and it's being used in courtrooms now. And people have to realize that.
All right, we are keeping a very close eye on that courtroom live, but as they're at sidebar, we're going to take a quick break. Law and Crime Network here on Crime and Investigations, coming right back. We are back live in the George Burch murder trial, accused of killing his wife. Critical evidence being introduced right now in court. Sergeant Richard Lopnow is on the witness stand. He is talking about Fitbit data. Yes, using the data coming from a Fitbit to try to show that the person who the defense says really did it, the boyfriend, couldn't have done it. Let's go back live into the courtroom.
61, Attorney Schuckert, subject to cross.
161 is the affidavit. I think for all of these, we have that standing objection. So even when I say no objection, I guess that means no objection to any other grounds. We have all those continued objections, which I think were 6, 7, or 8 in number. In terms of 162, that specific file on the disk is labeled Report of Findings on Doug Dietrich, Final 19 SEFT 2017.
Well, I'm just dealing with 161 right now. Let me just look at it briefly.
Of course, this is the trial of George Burch, accused of killing Nicole Vanderheiden, a woman who he did not know until that night. And the defense is saying it was actually her boyfriend who did it. Let's go back in live.
It's being offered, but with the understanding that only the spreadsheet information is really going to be presented. And this has been discussed earlier, knowing that any other objections subject to cross to the receipt of 162, that DVD disc.
No, Your Honor.
All right. 162 is received. And you can continue, Attorney Lassay.
Sergeant Lopnow, with respect to the Fitbit data, were you asked to do any further analysis on that data yourself and comparing it to known samples of Mr. Dietrich's activity?
Yes, I was. We had the videotape interviews of Mr. Dietrich in which he is on video with his Fitbit on his wrist. So I was asked to compare the data that we received from Fitbit to what was viewed in those videos.
Can you describe for the jury how you went about doing that?
I had the copy of the video. I guess to give you an example, I have 2 screens on my computer, so I had the video on one screen and I had the Excel spreadsheet of the Fitbit data on the other screen, so I was comparing them side by side.
The Excel spreadsheet of the Fitbit data, how is that organized?
There's several spreadsheets within that document. The one I used to compare was labeled steps by minute. So for example, there's also a spreadsheet in that document labeled distance by minute, I believe, and a couple other ones, but I used the one detailing the steps recorded per minute.
So really what you were interested in is comparing the number of steps on the Fitbit report to the number of steps that you were able to potentially observe Mr. Dietrich taking on the videos that you were watching.
Yes, that's correct.
When you received the information from Fitbit, was that initially in UTC or was that in Central Standard Time?
I believe it was Central Standard Time.
And were you able to adequately come to a conclusion about the accuracy of that data based on looking at it and comparing it to the known data on the video?
Yes, I was.
Did you watch the entirety of Mr. Dietrich's recorded interviews?
I did.
And those were 2 separate recorded interviews, is that correct?
Yes, the first interview by Sergeant Holschbach with her initial interview of Doug at his residence, as well as a follow-up interview at the Sheriff's Office by Detective Kingston and Deputy Caters.
And the first interview at Mr. Dietrich's house, how long was that interview?
I believe it was about 2 hours.
So you were able to view minute by minute Mr. Dietrich's activities and compare them to each minute of the recorded activities from Fitbit?
Yes, I was.
In the interview again at the sheriff's office, how long was that?
About 3 hours.
And were you able to do the same thing with respect to that data? Compare the information minute by minute from Fitbit to your minute by minute observations of Mr. Dietrich's activities?
Yes, I did.
Is it fair to say that during large portions of each of those videos, there is no activity by Mr. Dietrich, either that he's seated or not moving?
Yes.
And when Mr. Dietrich is seated or not moving, what is the Fitbit registering?
It's registering that there are no steps being taken.
And that is reported in minute by minute data?
Yes.
0 steps per minute?
Yes.
Did you note any instances where Mr. Dietrich was not moving, but the Fitbit was registering activity?
There was a couple instances. One I recall during the initial interview by Sergeant Steffens at his residence. He pulls his phone out of his pocket. You can see his hands moving. He's not necessarily taking steps, but he's showing Sergeant Holschbach the phone. At that point, there are several steps recorded. Also, I remember in the interview at the sheriff's office, there are times when he begins talking with his hands. So he's still seated, but he's moving his hands quite a bit. And at that point, there are some steps registered.
When you say some steps, are you saying 20, 50, or is it 2 or 3?
I don't remember the amount. It was maybe 8 or 10 steps at most. I don't recall. I'd have to review my notes.
Do you have a report that specifically outlined those instances where there were discrepancies?
Yes, I do.
If you were able to review your report, would that allow you to refresh your recollection?
Yes.
All right, so as they prepare to hand him that document, Jesse Weber, this is a critical point. They're referring to Dietrich, of course, that's the boyfriend. That's the guy who the defense says did it. They're trying to prove that he couldn't have done it.
I love this. This is very interesting, trying to prove how many steps he took and how reliable it is. Because as you just heard, sometimes there's discrepancies. You can move your hand and a step is recorded. But this guy, right there on the stand, recorded those discrepancies. This is a new way of tracking people, especially in a murder case. Very interesting.
All right, as he reviews that document, let's get in a quick break here. We will come right back live into this courtroom right here on Law and Crime Network in a moment. We are back live in the trial of George Burch, accused of murdering a beautiful mother named Nicole Vanderheiden. And now in court, a critical piece of testimony of a sergeant who is laying out what is called the Fitbit data. The point of this testimony is effectively to rule out the guy who the defense says did it, the boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich. So far we've been hearing from Sergeant Richard Lopnow, who has been describing the methodology. How were they able to compare the Fitbit data to what Doug Dietrich says, that's the boyfriend, did that night? Let's go back live into the courtroom.
No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Yes, thank you. Sergeant Lopnow, I just want to focus on this Fitbit data a little bit. So you said that you were able to watch the videos that were available to the Brown County Sheriff's Office of Doug Dietrich, correct?
Yes.
And you said it was about 2 hours on May 21st and 3 hours on May 22nd?
If I remember correctly, yes.
So I know lawyers are pretty bad at math, but I'm going to try to do this. So as the state was saying, the minutes you were able to watch, that also means that, so there's 22 hours that you weren't able to identify any sort of Fitbit data and compare it to what Doug Dietrich was actually doing on video, correct?
Can you clarify what you're asking?
So you watched 2 hours on May 21st? 2 hours
Yes.
of video?
Correct.
And there's 22 hours of time that you didn't watch?
That's correct. For this report, I was specifically comparing the data to the times that were on record that we had recorded.
So then just to put it in terms of minutes, that's 1,320 minutes of time that you yourself did not watch.
That's possible. I would need a calculator to confirm that.
Me too. And then same thing on May 22nd. So there's 3 hours you watched, but that also means that there's 21 hours that you don't have accounted for, correct?
Correct.
So then that's 1,260 minutes.
Again,
Or around there?
yes, very possible, yes.
So in total, that's 2,580 or right around there minutes that you didn't watch yourself.
Again, I can't give you exact numbers, but approximately, yes.
And you said that there was some errors in the Fitbit data, but they were minor in your opinion?
There were those small inconsistencies, as we discussed, in watching the video compared to those times when it did record a couple steps. Mr. Dietrich is seen moving his hands at that time with the Fitbit on his wrist. A couple instances also, as we discussed, when he was taking steps, a couple steps, there wasn't a lot of motion. There were very slow movements, and at that time it did not record.
So those were errors in the data, albeit minor.
Yes.
And then I know you're trying to explain why those errors didn't happen. Do you have the technological background to be able to diagnose those errors? Or is
No.
that just your lay opinion on it?
I'm describing what I viewed in the video compared to the records, just that.
Okay. Do you have a background in technology where you can tell us how a Fitbit operates?
No, I don't.
Can you tell us how the Fitbit app operates?
No, I can't.
Okay. If somebody's not wearing a Fitbit device, does that mean that they are likely not recording steps then?
I would believe if the Fitbit device is not being worn, it's not recording steps, yes.
Have you done any further research into Fitbit to familiarize yourself with it?
No, I haven't.
Sergeant Lau. Now, I then want to just back up with you further than what the state did. Back in June, you had returned from Madison and you were still the lead investigator in this case, correct? Or a co-lead investigator?
Yeah, at that time, Sergeant Slinger had officially taken that lead role.
And on June 3rd, you obtained a search warrant to download the data of Doug Dietrich's phone?
Yes, I believe so.
And Doug Dietrich's phone was a Samsung Galaxy S4, correct?
I believe it was.
And his phone number was 920-621-0593?
I don't recall that specifically.
If I show you your report, will that refresh your memory?
Yes, it would. That is the number listed for Douglas Dietrich's contact information in our report management system.
Thank you. And then did you execute that search warrant?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe how that process worked?
After having the search warrant approved, the phone was turned over to crime analyst Tyler Bailing, and he performed an extraction of the phone at that time.
And then that extraction would have been put into evidence at the Brown County Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
And then it's stored pretty much there throughout the course of the investigation?
It's in evidence. I believe Tyler also keeps working copies for review.
And then that information would eventually be sent to the defense as part of discovery?
I believe it would, yes.
And then in July and September, did you also collect DNA samples from Adam Kolpak and Matt Wazenberg?
Yes, I believe I did.
And they gave you consent to take those DNA samples?
Yes.
And can you just identify the report that I showed you earlier?
The one you provided me is a report that I completed on the service of the search warrant on Mr. Dietrich's phone on June 3rd.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Sergeant Locke, now just briefly, you were asked about all of the hours on May 21st for which you did not review any video surveillance of Doug Dietrich. Is that because you didn't have video surveillance of those time periods?
For much of those time periods, yes.
On the 21st, so on May 21st, that's Saturday, the only known surveillance video or video information that you have from Mr. Dietrich is the recordings that Sergeant Holzbach took at his house. Is that correct?
Yes.
And likewise, on May 22nd of 2016, the only known video recorded time periods you have for Mr. Dietrich are the 3 hours that were at the Brown County Sheriff's Office. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
So it's not as if you intentionally failed to review other video. These are the only time periods for which you have known video surveillance of Mr. Dietrich, when you can observe that he's wearing his Fitbit and you have accurate timestamps.
That's correct.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Navy Cross?
A little. So Sergeant Lopnow, I know you didn't have surveillance video for those times, but essentially what I was trying to drive home is that means that you're not able to verify that Fitbit data at those periods of time that we went over, correct?
Correct. The time I was able to verify is specifically what we had on video.
Do you have a cell phone?
Yes, I do.
And when you call somebody, does it work most of the time?
In most cases, yes.
And then sometimes that technology just doesn't work for whatever reason?
At times.
You also send text messages with your cell phone?
Yes.
And sometimes, or most of the times, I imagine that works.
Most of the time, yes.
And then sometimes it just doesn't work?
At times, yes.
And then, again, same thing with, say, GPS. Have you ever used a GPS device?
Yes, I have.
And that works most of the time?
Yes.
And then sometimes it doesn't work?
At times.
And again, with the Fitbit, if somebody's not wearing it, it will not provide information that'll be used, correct? Or show step data?
Yeah, I would conclude that if it's not being worn, it's not recording any of that information.
Nothing further.
Any redirect? All right. Attorney Lassay, did you need your break at this time? All right. We're going to take an earlier break than usual this morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back 10 to 15 minutes.
Hashtag Fitbit fail. That's what the defense is trying to focus on here. The idea that you cannot trust the data that comes from a Fitbit. Basically comparing it to your cell phone and texting and saying, come on, there are mistakes there. Of course there'll be mistakes with regard to Fitbit data. Jesse Weber here in studio with me, anchor here at Law&Crime, as well as an attorney. What do you think of this first witness on the Fitbit data?
Oh, I love it. We've been waiting for this since the case started, and you have to wonder because they were only able to match up the Fitbit data to the video surveillance footage of Dietrich in the night in question and what he was doing. It's all well and good until you heard all of the problems with Fitbit, meaning it can record steps even when he's not doing anything, or when he is doing something, it doesn't record steps. Now, he can monitor, the Sergeant Richard Lopnow can monitor all these steps and say, oh, this is where the discrepancies are, but it's planting the seed of doubt in the minds of the jurors that this thing is not 100% reliable.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Let's just we're keeping a close eye on the live courtroom feed. They are in a break, but if the lawyers are debating anything of significance, we will go right back into that courtroom. So if you see my eyes looking off camera, that's because I'm just looking at our live feed to make sure that you're not missing anything significant inside that courtroom. Jesse, another point that the defense was trying to make here is that this guy, this witness, this sergeant, why should he be the guy who's the expert on Fitbit data, right? What do you know about this stuff? You don't have training. You don't have expertise in this area.
It's a perfect technique. This guy doesn't work for Fitbit. He doesn't have a degree in engineering or how any of this technology works. He collected the data and he tried to analyze it. You have to do that as a defense attorney. And it was perfect because he's assuming this is why the discrepancies occur. And he can record it and monitor and track it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't explain why it didn't record certain steps and why it did record certain steps. And the whole issue here is whether or not this is reliable, because we're talking about somebody's life here. We're talking about tracking where somebody was. And if you're going to implicate this man, Douglas Dietrich, in the murder of Nicole Vanderheiden, you better be sure that this data is as reliable as can be.
Well, and again, it's the defense who's implicating him. And what is amazing about this case is the fact that Dietrich was arrested initially for this crime. The boyfriend, the typical suspect, the one who must have done it, was initially arrested, and then they realized, at least according to the prosecution, they had the wrong guy. It was actually, they believe, George Burch, and there's a split screen. You see the boyfriend on the right, and you see the defendant on the left.
Yeah, when you have George Burch's DNA all over her body and his cell phone evidence pinpointing to 4 key locations, you kind of say, maybe we should forget about Doug Dietrich and move to this guy.
Because if you find Doug Dietrich's DNA at the scene, it's not incriminating. The question is, some guy who doesn't know her, well, what is his DNA doing there? We want to play a piece of sound here. This is from what we just heard, correct? Right. This is from Sergeant Lopp now. This is the crux of his testimony with regard to the Fitbit data in this trial.
Sergeant Lopp, now with respect to the Fitbit data, were you asked to do any further analysis on that data yourself and comparing it to known samples of Mr. Dietrich's activity?
Yes, I was. We had the videotaped interviews of Mr. Dietrich in which he is on video with his Fitbit on his wrist. So I was asked to compare the data that we received from Fitbit to what was viewed in those videos.
Can you describe for the jury how you went about doing that?
I had the copy of the video. I guess to give you an example, I have 2 screens on my computer, so I had the video on one screen and I had the Excel spreadsheet of the Fitbit data on the other screen, so I was comparing them side by side.
The Excel spreadsheet of the Fitbit data, how is that organized?
There's several spreadsheets within that document. The one I used to compare was labeled steps by minute. So for example, there's also a spreadsheet in that document labeled distance by minute, I believe, and a couple other ones, but I used the one detailing the steps recorded per minute.
So really what you were interested in is comparing the number of steps on the Fitbit report to the number of steps that you were able to potentially observe Mr. Dietrich taking on the videos that you were watching.
Yes, that's correct.
When you received the information from Fitbit, was that initially in UTC or was that in Central Standard Time?
I believe it was Central Standard Time.
And were you able to adequately come to a conclusion about the accuracy of that data based on looking at it and comparing it to the known data on the video?
Yes, I was.
Did you watch the entirety of Mr. Dietrich's recorded interviews?
I did.
And those were 2 separate recorded interviews, is that correct?
Yes, the first interview by Sergeant Holschbach with her initial interview of Doug at his residence, as well as a follow-up interview at the Sheriff's Office by Detective Kingston and Deputy Caters.
And the first interview at Mr. Dietrich's house, how long was that interview?
I believe it was about 2 hours.
So you were able to view minute by minute Mr. Dietrich's activities and compare them to each minute of the recorded activities from Fitbit?
Yes, I was.
In the interview again at the Sheriff's Office, how long was that?
About 3 hours.
And were you able to do the same thing with respect to that data, compare the information minute by minute from Fitbit to your minute by minute observations of Mr. Dietrich's activities?
Yes, I did.
Is it fair to say that during large portions of each of those videos, there is no activity by Mr. Dietrich, either that he's seated or not moving?
Yes.
And when Mr. Dietrich is seated or not moving, what is the Fitbit registering?
It's registering that there are no steps being taken.
And that is reported in minute by minute data?
Yes.
0 steps per minute?
Yes.
Did you note any instances where Mr. Dietrich was not moving, but the Fitbit was registering activity?
There was a couple instances. One I recall during the initial interview by Sergeant Steffens at his residence. He pulls his phone out of his pocket. You can see his hands moving. He's not necessarily taking steps, but he's showing Sergeant Holschbach the phone. At that point, there are several steps recorded. Also, I remember in the interview at the Sheriff's Office, there are times when he begins talking with his hands. So he's still seated, but he's moving his hands quite a bit. And at that point, there are some steps registered.
All right, we are now very close to the end of the prosecution's case in the murder trial of George Burch, accused of killing a beautiful young mother. And the question is, why is this particular testimony, there she is, Nicole Vanderheiden, why is this testimony so important? And Jesse and I have been in studio, been going back and forth to figure out exactly what this sergeant's testimony the relevance of this testimony is, and what we may be seeing in the future, because I don't think this is the end of the data that we're going to be seeing from the prosecution. So Jesse, Sergeant Richard Lopp now, I think, has a kind of limited purpose here, right? He's basically, the goal here is rule out the boyfriend. Boyfriend's wearing the Fitbit, want to rule him out as a possible suspect because he's the one that the defense is pointing the finger at. But they're just comparing here the Fitbit data from his Fitbit to surveillance video that shows him wearing the Fitbit, right?
Right, and that's why I think it's a bit limited in the sense that we can track him. Okay, we have the surveillance footage. We can see when he was taking steps or movements and match it based upon the Fitbit data and account for discrepancies. But there is 21 hours, 22 hours where he's not on surveillance footage. So maybe they can use that as a sampling. Said, okay, if we can use this as a way to track him in this time frame, it'll help us determine when he wasn't on camera, where he was, and how he was using it. I think it is a bit limited, and I think the defense really pointed a good hole in that, but it is a way to introduce this data and at least show we can track some of what he has been doing.
See, I think on a sort of macro scale, what the prosecution's trying to do here is give the jurors something to hang their hat on to say, all right, I'm comfortable ruling out Dietrich. Because Dietrich's, the possibility of reasonable doubt in this case is called Doug Dietrich. That's the defense. Reasonable doubt is Doug Dietrich. And if they can give them something tangible to hold on to say, you know, that's the reason it couldn't have been Doug Dietrich, among other reasons.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, you said it perfectly before. You look at the boyfriend, you look at the husband, it's the prime first suspect. But here, if they can give something that says, you know what, it just doesn't match up, particularly since there's so much evidence against George Burch, and you can have a motive for the boyfriend, but it's not as strong as the George Burch case.
And again, George Burch is admitting he was there. Question is just why and what happened. We're going to take a break. They are still in a break inside that courtroom. We will come back in live in a moment. Welcome back. We are keeping a very close eye on the live courtroom right here on the Law and Crime Network as they are basically setting up for a big display of Fitbit evidence. Basically, the prosecution here trying to rule out Nicole Vander Heiden's boyfriend as a possible suspect. And, you know, we talk about this case a lot. We call it the George Burch trial, but this is really the Nicole Vander Heiden trial. This is the trial of this beautiful young mother who was brutally killed. And the question is, did George Burch do it? A complete stranger whose DNA was found all over the crime scene. The defense pointing the finger at her boyfriend who was initially arrested in connection with this crime. He's denying that he had anything to do with it. And so we're now seeing the very end of the prosecution's case, where they are basically trying to rule out Doug Dietrich, the boyfriend, as a possible suspect. But he testified in this case. And by the way, we're expecting George Burch to testify as well. But when Doug Dietrich testified, he was asked the ultimate question. Let's take a look at that.
Doug, do you recall, you said your pants and your shoes that you were wearing out that night, you provided those to law enforcement?
Yes.
What other clothing do you recall you were wearing out to the watering hole that night?
I know I had a button-up green with striped shirt, and I had a black T-shirt. It was a T-shirt I had had for many years, and I had always worn that. It was a black T-shirt, concert T-shirt. It was, I'd said Razor 94.7 on it, and I had had it probably for at least, since probably high school when I'd gone to my first concerts.
Did you tell law enforcement about the shirts that you were wearing that night?
Yes, I did.
Tell them where they could find them?
Yep, and they had asked, and I told them they'd be, I thought they were right by my clothes hamper for the dirty clothes. I put them in.
Do you recall what you wore to bed that night?
I think it was just, I wore a T-shirt and boxers to bed that night.
Do you know which T-shirt you wore to bed?
I wore that same T-shirt.
That Razor 94?
Yes,
T-shirt?
the black T-shirt, yep.
In fact, were you still wearing it the next day?
Yep.
How do you know that now?
Well, I know that, I remember when I sent that Snapchat to Nikki, that I was wearing that T-shirt.
Snapchat where you're holding Dylan?
Yeah, so I was holding Dylan, I believe we were on the ground, and just, did a little selfie with Dylan and myself and sent it over to her. I remember taking that off after I had called the missing persons report in, and took a quick shower and then changed into some different clothes at that point.
Prior to your arrest, did you own a pair of Air Jordan shoes?
I believe I had an old pair. It was actually a pair of my brother's shoes that he had given to me that were just an old around the house pair of shoes.
What did you use them for?
I use them, I put them on when I would mow the grass on the riding lawnmower. If I usually kept them in the garage, if I went out in the garage to go grab something, whatever, just they're slip-on shoes and in poor condition.
At that time, did you have quite a few pair of shoes?
Yes, I did. There weren't shoes that I would wear out or anything like that because they were old. I would, heavily worn.
Doug, did you have absolutely any involvement in Nikki's disappearance or death?
No, I did not.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Welcome back. We are keeping a close eye on the live courtroom. There is no feed right now in the trial of George Burch, accused of murdering Nicole Vanderheiden. Remember, the key here is Nicole Vanderheiden's boyfriend, Doug Dietrich. He is the focus today of the testimony from the prosecution. The prosecution wrapping up its case, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, with Fitbit data, basically trying to show Doug Dietrich, who was wearing a Fitbit, couldn't have done it. He testified in this case, and one of the areas that the prosecution was focusing on was the fact that he couldn't have done it. But from the defense perspective, it's that he was on drugs. And that could have enhanced the possibility that he was responsible, that he doesn't remember what happened. They were fighting that night. Let's take a look at a clip from earlier. Doug Dietrich on the stand talking about that drug use.
What about when you smoked weed at the watering hole?
It was one of those vape pens or whatever they call them, and it was I don't know, being like passed around in the crowd, and somebody handed it to me. I don't recall who, and I did take a puff off it.
And you gave Greg your Adderall earlier on May 20th?
I don't recall giving him any of mine, but I don't know.
And then you snorted that amphetamine with Greg at the sardine can?
No, I did not at the sardine can. I mean, are you talking about inside, or what do you mean?
When did you snort amphetamine with Greg or Adderall with Greg?
I don't. I'm trying to recall if I did, because I remember saying to Greg, I don't want to snort any. I don't like that. I do have a prescription for it, and I do take it regularly. The correct way to, and just ingest it. I take it daily, and I just don't like typically snorting anything. So.
But you snorted it on that night, that morning?
I think at some point I did. I don't know if it was like when we were leaving the watering hole, or when we had just maybe gotten to the sardine can. We parked in that back bank parking lot. I think it might have been then. I just don't totally recall when I did.
So you snorted Adderall with Greg?
I think I did a little bit. I'm not certain on that, though.
I'm just looking for a yes or no answer. You snorted amphetamine with Greg?
It's hard to, from all the stories and everything I've heard afterwards, and I just don't know. I would lean towards yes, but I just don't specifically recall me actually doing it. I remember the opportunity to, and I do remember saying no, that I wasn't going to. But I think because there was like 2 times, and I know one time I said no for sure, and maybe I think the one time I did, and I don't know when that was. I think either when we left the watering hole, or it was in Greg's car, I believe.
And then moving back to when you're at your house, Greg eventually left.
Yeah, after a short time period of us being there.
Dallas left.
Yep, a short time after Greg left.
And then you testified yesterday that you did your nighttime routine.
Yes.
What is that?
Basically, getting a glass of ice water, brushing my teeth, taking my contacts out, washing my face, and then getting ready for bed. Just undressing.
And then you testified that you woke up the next morning. When was that?
I don't know the exact time, but I think it was between like 6 and 7, like 6:30, I'm guessing.
So roughly that's 8 hours since you had saw Nikki, according to your testimony.
Yeah, that would be, I think it was about, I'm guessing around 11 o'clock that I had last seen her.
You did not call the police at 6:30.
No,
You did not call Nicole's sister at 6:30.
no,
You did not call Nicole's mother at 6:30.
no, I did not.
You didn't call any of your friends at 6:30.
No, I did not.
You didn't call your parents.
Nope,
You didn't call your brother.
no, I did not.
You just went back to bed.
Yeah, I was tired, I was hungover, and had a crying baby and took care of him and fed him and went back to bed right away.
And you knew where Nikki was at that time.
No, I did not.
And then you woke up again around 11.
Yeah, I think approximately 11 o'clock.
And now it had been 12 hours since you had last seen Nikki.
Correct.
She still wasn't home for Dylan.
No, she was not.
Did you search for Nikki on foot or by vehicle?
No, I did not.
Still didn't call the police.
I did not at that time, no.
Because you knew you didn't have to.
I don't know what I was starting to get concerned and, because I figured she was out, if she stayed out late, that, she was probably going to sleep in as well and probably feeling it similar to me, hungover and tired, that she was going to, sleep it off, that we had a lot to drink that night.
You finally called police around 4:30. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
And that's 17 hours since you last saw her.
Yeah, I think so, yep.
And that's also after her body was already found.
Yeah, at that time, and afterwards I did, yeah, that would be after.
And that's after a large police buildup off Hoffman Road.
Yeah, I was unaware of that police buildup until well after the fact.
All right, we are keeping an eye on the live courtroom. It does look like they're back in court, but Jesse Weber, I think what we just heard is the maybe the most important area for the defense, which is Doug Dietrich seems kind of shady about this question of did he do drugs, et cetera, that night. And there's a danger there for the prosecution that some jurors will say, look, yeah, I think George Burch probably did it, but proof beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't know, this Dietrich guy, I don't trust him.
Oh, you nailed it straight on the head. How he appears on the stand matters so much. And whether he's being evasive about drugs or what color the sky is, it's not so much the content, but his behavior. And if it looks like he's hiding something about one thing, he might be hiding something about another thing.
The only thing that is going to be more important than Doug Dietrich's testimony, George Burch's testimony that we're expecting in this case. Again, we're keeping an eye on that live courtroom. Let's get in a break here. We will come back. Law and Crime in a moment. We are back live in the courtroom. The murder trial of Nicole Vanderheiden, the victim here, George Burch on trial. The defense pointing the finger at her boyfriend. Prosecution calling some of its final witnesses. This witness, Tyler Belling, is a computer forensic specialist from the police department who examines digital records and phones. And it seems that he is going to be the one to talk about the defendant's phone. At least that's what we expect, to try to link him to the crime scene. Let's go back in live.
Belonging to Nicole Vanderheiden, a Motorola Max XT1250 belonging to Aaron Kolinsky, and an iPhone 6S belonging to Darcy Lipsky.
When you talk about conducting a forensic analysis of a phone, can you describe for the jury what you do, what steps you undertake to conduct that analysis?
Yes. At the Sheriff's Office, we have specialized hardware and software that allows us to copy all the data from the cell phone in order to use specialized software to review what's contained on that cell phone.
And what types of software do you utilize to analyze phones?
Typically, it's the Celebrate system.
Can you describe what Celebrate does?
Celebrate is programmed to identify the phone and identify the contents of the phone to be able to copy that data from the phone and then put it in a displayable format to make it easy to review.
Celebrate a program that you use regularly in your work?
Yes, it is.
Is that the the system that you use to analyze most phones?
The majority of them, yes.
There are different types of devices, is that correct? Apple phones versus Android phones. Can you describe how the analysis of each might be different?
There's different profiles built within Celebrate to analyze different models of phones. So specifically on an Android, it might gather information that's not available from an Apple device or vice versa.
Does Celebrate allow you to obtain information from apps on phones as well?
Yes, it does.
Are there specialized subsets of that Celebrate program that allow you to look at individual apps?
Yes, there is.
Is Celebrate a software that is constantly updating?
Celebrate's updated several times a year, depending on the progression of different apps that come to the market.
And are you provided with ongoing training on how to use that program relative to the updates?
Yes, I am.
How is that training provided?
It's provided online through the manufacturer of the Celebrate system.
Every time they give you an update in terms of how to obtain data from an app, they also instruct you how to use it?
Yeah, there are release notes related to each upgrade.
For someone with your training and experience level, is that online education fairly common?
Yes, it is.
It's fairly easy for you to understand and
Yes,
follow?
it is.
Specifically, when you're doing the analysis of these phones on May 21st and May 22nd, what type of information are you looking for?
Initially, during the investigation, we were looking at mainly the last activity that occurred on the phone, whether it be calls, texts, anything within the time frame of the night of the 20th into the early morning hours of the 21st.
Is it fair to say that you work in conjunction with the investigators? They provide you with information that might be relevant, and then you're asked to potentially find information on those phones that would corroborate or contradict the information that's being provided by witnesses?
That's correct.
You share your information when you receive it with the investigators?
Yes, I do.
Specifically, when you downloaded Nicole Vanderheiden's phone, what type of information were you looking for?
We were looking for the last activity that occurred on that phone, whether it be a call or a text, anything really at that point.
Do you recall approximately what time on the 20th or the 21st of May 2016 you observed the last known activity from Ms. Vanderheiden's phone?
I believe it was right around midnight.
When a phone is powered off or shut off, is there an entry that you're able to locate using the Celebrate program to see if a phone is powered off?
If the phone is powered off by the user, that would create a log entry that the device was powered down.
If the phone is not manually powered off, but rather runs out of battery life, is that an activity that is logged in the Celebrate program?
That would not be logged, as the operating system of the device doesn't have the opportunity to create that log as the battery dies.
Were you able to observe Nikki's phone being manually shut off in the early morning hours on May 21st of 2016?
I was not.
You were also indicated earlier that on May 22nd of 2016 you were asked to analyze Doug Dietrich's cell phone. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And again, what sort of information are you looking for in your analysis of Doug Dietrich's cell phone?
Again, the initial investigation of that device would be anything within the time frame of the night of the 20th into the early morning hours of the 21st, whether it be calls, texts, any activity that would have occurred on that device.
And did you also look for activity that occurred throughout the day on the 21st prior to the receipt of the phone?
Yes, we did.
You're looking for call logs with respect to Mr. Dietrich?
Yes.
Text messages?
Correct.
Any other type of messaging or communication system information?
Correct.
So emails,
Yes.
Facebook Messenger?
Yes.
Did you observe any of those types of activities, calls,
Yes.
messages, and Facebook activity?
Yes.
And you provided your observations to the investigators?
That's correct.
Now, were you asked to actually analyze the report yourself, or did you give the report to the investigators to have them look at it?
I would have created a copy of the report for them to review, but then I would also conduct my own analysis on that data.
Are there occasions where you do simply turn over the report to law enforcement or officers and have them look at it?
Yes.
But in this particular instance, in addition to turning over a copy, you conducted an analysis yourself.
That's correct.
With respect to Doug Dietrich's phone, were you able to note the last time that any activity was logged in the early morning hours of May 21st of 2016?
Yes, I was.
And what was that last activity?
I believe it was a Facebook call or message at approximately 3:07 a.m.
Do you know the party to whom that message was sent?
I believe it was sent to Dallas Kennedy.
And again, with respect to a manual power off, if the phone had been manually powered off, is that something that would have logged on Cellbrite?
Yes, it is.
Did you note a manual power off on Doug Dietrich's phone in the early morning hours of May 21st, 2016?
I did not.
And after that 3:07 a.m. contact, when is the next instance of affirmative activity on Doug Dietrich's cell phone?
I believe it's not until sometime the following day.
In the afternoon on that date?
Correct.
In fact, if you were able to refer to your notes, would that allow you to refresh your recollection as to the next time?
Yes.
And while you're looking through your notes, I asked you about Cellbrite logging manual power offs. Does Cellbrite also log a manual power on?
Yes, it would.
And do you know if a manual power on was noted on the Cellbrite program for Doug Dietrich's phone on May 21st of 2016?
I believe it was.
Do you recall the time, after looking at your notes, of the manual power on for Mr. Dietrich's phone?
All right, so this is critical testimony about cell phone records. And here, Jesse, we're focusing on Doug Dietrich's phone, right?
Absolutely, yeah. They're monitoring when the last activity was, and we know that it was at 3:07 a.m. He sent a message to the babysitter, Dallas Kennedy, and he didn't use his phone until the next afternoon. Again, really going to the point of, if he really cared about his girlfriend, why didn't he try to get a hold of her?
But I think this is, again, from the prosecution's perspective, they want to be able to demonstrate that there's nothing incriminating here. Let's go back in live.
On most devices, you'd hold down the power button until that device fully powers down. Same process to manually turn it on. If the phone is off, you'd hold the power button down until that device turns on.
When you do a Cellbrite analysis on a phone, is it possible for you to receive or view activity that occurred retroactively while the phone was powered off?
Yes, it is.
Can you describe that process?
Yes, so if you're logged into any kind of social media or messaging account for multiple devices, for example, if you're logged into an email account on a computer and that same email on the phone, you were to send an email from the computer and later power on your phone, you would view that message in the outbox of your email on the phone. Being that those two devices are signed into the same account, that data is all synced together.
So for example, if Mr. Dietrich was utilizing his computer to send messages or emails on an account to which he was logged in on the phone, and he was doing that during a time period that the phone was powered off, when he powers the phone back on, you're able to actually use the phone itself to collect data that was sent using a different device.
That's correct.
So for example, if Mr. Dietrich testified that he sent messages using a computer device at 11 a.m., we know his phone wasn't on until 2:42 p.m. Using your phone analysis, you're actually still able to see the data that he sent using the computer.
That's correct.
So in fact, were you able to observe that Mr. Dietrich was affirmatively engaging in messaging activity on his computer during a time when his phone was powered off?
Yes, I was.
And what types of messages or communication was Mr. Dietrich engaging in the early morning or in the morning hours of May 21st of 2016?
Facebook Messenger.
So he was using that application using another device?
Yes.
And I guess I used the term app earlier. Also, can you explain for the jury what an app is?
An app is short for application or a piece of software that you would download to put on your device or phone.
What are some common communication applications?
Facebook Messenger, Kik, WhatsApp. Most people are familiar with iMessage, it comes standard on an iPhone.
So in terms of your observations, and I'm not asking you for specific content, but is it true that in the late morning hours of May 21st of 2016 that Mr. Dietrich is engaging in messaging to various parties, Dallas Kennedy, Heather Meyer, in an attempt to locate Nikki?
That's correct.
And you're able to observe those communications that were sent from another device?
That's correct.
And then you indicated at about 2:42 p.m., that's when the phone was manually powered on, correct?
That's correct.
Are there messages that he's sending to individuals that are consistent with the phone then being powered on in that time frame?
That's correct.
And is it fair to say that once that phone is powered on at 2:42 p.m., there is then a flurry of activity on that phone that it appears to be an attempt to locate Nicole?
That is correct.
And after 2:42 p.m. is the first time that you see any flurry of activity sent from the phone itself, correct?
That's correct.
With respect to Mr. Dietrich's phone, did you become aware that Mr. Dietrich was wearing a Fitbit device?
Yes, I did.
Did you locate the Fitbit app on his phone?
I did.
Do you recall when the first time you looked at that Fitbit app?
Can I refer to my notes?
If it would assist your recollection, yes.
All right, so we now know that Tyler Belling is going to be the expert to testify about the all-important Fitbit data in addition to the phone records. Jesse Weber, you and I were sitting here trying to figure out the timing with regard to Doug Dietrich's phone. I think it's an important point here being made, which is in addition to the phone records, you've got other devices which he was using, which could show, that he was trying to find her, that he was frantic that next day. Again, the defense trying to suggest that he, of course, was the killer.
Right. I mean, he was out the night before. He was drinking, didn't power on his phone until the afternoon, but we just heard that he was using Facebook Messenger on a different device. So it's not as nefarious as the defense would like to believe. Oh, the guy didn't really care. He didn't turn on his phone, because he was contacting people, and it seemed he was contacting them about Nicole.
All right, let's get into a quick break here. When we come back, I think we'll be in the heart of the Fitbit data testimony. Back in a moment. They have gotten past the original sort of data points about the Fitbit testimony. We're now in the heart of it. And remember, this is Tyler Belling on the witness stand, a computer forensic crime analyst. The key to this is the prosecution is trying to show that the victim's boyfriend could not have killed Nicole Vanderheiden, and they're trying to use Fitbit data from his Fitbit to help prove that. Let's go back live into the courtroom.
65 and 166 are received, and they may be published at this time on the screen.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So after documents are viewed by the court, they are entered into evidence, and now, in this case, they are put up on a big, giant screen for the jury to see. That's what's been happening inside this courtroom. You heard them referring to this as exhibits. These are the exhibits that have been approved by the court, and this will relate to Fitbit data. And the motions that Doug Dietrich was making, let's go back into the courtroom.
In terms of the numbers, the numbers of steps, you have, I think, 0 through 120 listed. Did you select the number in terms of how high you needed to go?
I did not.
Okay.
That's automatically generated by Excel when you create this chart.
Okay. And if Mr. Dietrich had so you used Excel to generate this?
That's correct.
That's a program you're familiar with and use regularly? If Mr. Dietrich had in fact taken more steps in any particular minute, if he was running and took 200 steps in a minute, the graph automatically would have increased that higher number?
That's correct.
So while we see spikes, those spikes are based on the number of steps taken, not based on any other extraneous factor?
That's correct.
And then if I could view 166. Veiling, is what's displayed on the screen, we're actually going to reduce the size a little bit. On 166, are there numbers on the left side of the graph that indicate the number of steps in the exhibit in front of you? Okay. Your Honor, that was not displaying on there, so we're attempting to reduce the size of the visual so that the numbers display.
That's fine. It's just a different version of 166 for the record, right?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Just for the record, what's being shown now on the screen is still the 166 is just an expanded version of that graph showing the numbers on the left. Is that right?
The 166 is as the form that Mr. Veiling can view now. What was displayed up there earlier was expanded too much so that you couldn't see the numbers. What's now displayed actually does include the entire exhibit. And then, Mr. Veiling, what we were talking about in terms of the number of steps before on this particular graph from 2:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. on May 21st of 2016, we'll actually note that the graph tops out at 60 steps. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's because essentially at no point during that time frame does Mr. Dietrich have more than 50 steps in any minute.
That's correct.
So the graph could be compressed.
That's correct.
And then this displays his activity on the far left at 2:30 in the morning until the far right 6:30 a.m. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
I'm going to ask you to use a pointer here because I know the times are actually pretty small. I don't know that the jury can actually sitting observe the times. Could you point to the last time that Mr. Dietrich's Fitbit is registering steps before 3:10 a.m.? Right here. And roughly what time is that?
308, between 308 and 309.
And then between that time frame and 6 in the morning, are there any instances where Mr. Dietrich is registering steps according to that data?
There are at approximately 4:18 a.m. Right here.
And about how many steps is it registering at that time?
Roughly 12.
And then there are 3 separate minutes where Mr. Dietrich is logging some activity between right around that time frame between 4:18 and 4:20 roughly.
That's correct.
Those are very few steps.
That's correct.
And then the next time that Mr. Dietrich's device registers any steps is approximately what time?
Approximately 6:09 a.m.
And that's what's depicted on the far right of the graph.
That's correct.
And then all the locations where there are no bars, does that mean that the spreadsheet actually logged 0 steps?
That's correct.
And again, that's consistent with the data that you extracted from the phone directly as well.
That's correct.
And as part of your work in this case, were you asked to assist investigators with comparing the data from Fitbit, both in terms of the extracted data or the data from Fitbit directly, to known video recorded activities of Mr. Dietrich?
Yes, I was.
And what was your role in that?
Created a demonstrative video from a segment of video that was taken at the Brown County Sheriff's Office and compared it to the data that we received from Fitbit.
In addition to creating that demonstrative video, did you make any attempts to observe surveillance footage and make comparisons to the Fitbit data?
Yes, I did.
And what surveillance video did you attempt to observe?
From the sardine can.
And were you able to affirmatively or definitively make any conclusions regarding that?
I was not.
And why is that?
The timestamp on the video from the sardine can wasn't accurate. We had a rough idea of approximately how many minutes it was off, but I couldn't lock it down to the exact second.
So based on your inability to come up with exact times on that timestamp, you weren't comfortable drawing any conclusions in comparing the surveillance video to the Fitbit data that you received?
That's correct.
Did you observe the entire sardine can video?
I did.
And did you actually attempt to compare that to the Fitbit data that you obtained?
Yes, I did.
Is it largely consistent?
It is largely consistent.
But again, you weren't able to form a specific conclusion because you weren't comfortable with a specific time frame.
Correct.
you make any other comparisons with respect to Mr. Dietrich's Fitbit data and other data points?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
I compared the data that we received from Fitbit with the data that we would have received from Google.
And did it again appear to be consistent?
It did.
Back to the demonstrative video that you created, which surveillance video of Mr. Dietrich did you use to create that demonstrative?
Yeah, we approach.
Go right ahead.
The video that you created, not a surprise that there's going to be a sidebar before that comes in. That is certainly the sort of evidence that could lead to some objections from the defense as to exactly what sort of video is created. But Jesse Weber, now we've heard the beginning, the seeds of the Fitbit data evidence. What do you make of what we've heard so far?
Oh, we've been waiting for this. So we know that they're just tracked from 2:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. and we know that there wasn't much activity. He did move at 4:18 a.m., 12 steps, and then the next time it registered a step was 6:09 a.m. We know the last recorded before that was 3:09. This is consistent with somebody who went to sleep. It's not so consistent with somebody who went to kill someone.
Well, also killed someone,
Yeah.
and then forced the other person at gunpoint to go bury the body, right? Because
Exactly.
that's the defense here, is that the boyfriend, Doug Dietrich, whose Fitbit we're talking about right here, actually goes, kills his girlfriend because she's having sex, allegedly, with George Burch, and then forces him to bury the body.
Outside of their home.
Outside of their
Yeah,
home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is so interesting. This is the first time I've seen Fitbit evidence in a courtroom.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see how it's used.
Let's go back in.
With the Google data, that objection is sustained. Jury's to disregard that last answer. All right? You may continue, Attorney Lassay.
Thank you. Back to the demonstrative video that you created. That was based on which set of surveillance?
It was a recorded interview at the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
So based on the fact that the interview was recorded at the Brown County Sheriff's Office, you were comfortable with the accuracy of the timestamp of that video?
Yes, I was.
And you were able to make comparisons from that video to the data that was obtained from Fitbit?
Yes, I was.
And did you also provide some assistance in allowing Sergeant Lopnow to make a comparison of that entire video to the Fitbit data set?
Yes, I did.
And you generated the bit of video that shows the overlay of the comparison?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe what you did to create that demonstrative?
Yes, I took a segment from the recorded interview at the Brown County Sheriff's Office that was timestamped in our records management system, and I compared that time frame to the data that was given to us by Fitbit and compared the two. So there will be, do you want me to describe the video?
Just briefly.
Okay. In the video, it will show the recorded interview, but also on the screen you will see the data from Fitbit and how it corresponds.
And then you, once you created that video, did you place that onto a DVD?
Yes, I did.
I would move for the admission. Actually, could you identify the exhibit that's in front of the clerk?
This is a DVD-R containing the Fitbit video of the recorded interview at the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
I would ask that that be admitted into evidence and ask for permission to show the video to the jury.
And the number on that exhibit?
167.
This is Exhibit 167, subject to cross. Any objection to its receipt at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay, 167 is received.
And, Your Honor, the video will be played without sound. The purpose, obviously, is not to get in the content of the conversation between Mr. Dietrich and the law enforcement officers, but merely to show activity as a demonstrative for the Fitbit data.
For those purposes, 167 can be shown with the volume turned down.
All right, as they prepare to play that video, let's get in a quick break here. Remember, that video is going to be of Doug Dietrich wearing a Fitbit. Come right back. Welcome back. We are back live in the George Burch murder trial, accused of murdering Nicole Vanderheiden. We are watching some groundbreaking testimony in this case right now. It is Fitbit data being introduced into evidence to try to show that the person that Burch and the defense team is pointing the finger at couldn't have done it. They're trying to point the finger at Nicole's boyfriend, Doug Dietrich. So what they've done is they've matched up video that they have, surveillance footage of him wearing his Fitbit with the Fitbit data. In the end, what they're trying to prove is that he could not have done this. He could not have been running around. He could not have been killing someone and then forcing someone else at gunpoint to bury the body based on what the Fitbit data shows. So as you see on the screen there, there's a time code there. They've just left the room a moment ago, meaning there were some steps, walking, some Fitbit activity. Let's go full screen of that. Watch that for a minute, and we'll come back in and explain a little bit more, because this is the big part. This is where you see 44 steps around 116. All right, let's keep that up, because if we see Doug Dietrich come back into the room on this video, I want to go back into that. But, Jesse, what we're looking at here is no sound. The jury is not hearing a word, even though this is a tape, an interrogation tape. But what they're saying isn't the significance here.
No, it's being used for demonstrative purposes and for this very reason. So he's out of the interrogation room right now. He's coming back in.
Yep.
He's coming back in, and he's monitoring how many steps he took. And now he took 44 steps during that 116 point. And this is being used to show, okay, if we can track his movements here, you can try to see how we might be able to use it when he's not on surveillance footage, and we can show how reliable it is. Now, it should be noted, it also tracks movement. So when he's using his hands, that's a bit of a discrepancy in the Fitbit data. He's not technically taking steps, but he is moving. And that's so fascinating watching this, how it is tracking this minute by minute, second by second.
And so I think what you're going to see here, so if you look at the numbers there on the right, you see the 117 had 10. We saw him walk back into the room, move his arms around a little bit, but 18, 19, and 20, you're going to see 0. No steps. So I'm presuming that you're going to see him sitting in that chair the whole time, from now until this surveillance tape, this interrogation tape, ends at 1:20.
Well, at least the state wishes he stays in the chair, because if he were to get up out of the chair in the next 3 minutes and walk around and it didn't record, that doesn't look good for them, because they want this to be as reliable as possible.
So remember, the jurors are inside this courtroom now, in a silent courtroom. They are watching video with no sound, just trying to assess the Fitbit data. A critical point that the prosecution believes helps demonstrate that the man you're seeing right there, Doug Dietrich, the boyfriend of the victim, didn't do it. They think that this data will help show that he wasn't moving around at critical times, when Nicole Vanderheiden was killed, and when the defendant, George Burch, says he was forced at gunpoint to bury the body. But it must be interesting to be sitting inside that courtroom right now in total silence.
Total silence, and they can't take anything from his movements. So they can't take anything from the fact that, oh, he's looking down, oh, he must be guilty, nothing like. They can't make anything from this video except his movements.
Now, I think that we didn't add that, did we? We didn't add that graphic. We did not. That's right. So that actually is coming from the official court videotape, and they wanted to show exactly where the Fitbit was.
And it's amazing because it's on a person 24/7. He has it on. And I bet you that is not even registering to him at that moment that he's wearing it, and now it's being used in a courtroom right now.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, people forget about wearing their Fitbits, of course, all the time. It looks like they're wrapping it up. Let's go back in live.
Analyst Bailing, does the demonstrative video that was just shown accurately reflect the video that you created?
Yes, it does.
At some point in time, there was an indicator in there that you could see Mr. Dietrich's Fitbit. Were you able to view that on the video?
Yes, I was.
Did you watch through later in the video where he actually pulls up his sleeves and you're able to take an even more clear look at that Fitbit on his hand?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall which interview room that was at the Brown County Sheriff's Office?
I believe it was room 3.
Do you know how far it is from room 3 to the bathroom?
I don't.
Is that in pretty close proximity to the restroom?
It is.
And did he You recall in the sound of the video, Mr. Dietrich actually asked to go use the restroom.
Yes, he did.
How is the layout there in front of the interview rooms and the bathroom? What is the layout of the sheriff's office there?
It's a hallway.
The hallway extend in both directions, not just to the bathroom, but further down?
That's correct.
Obviously, do you have any specific knowledge of where Mr. Dietrich went when he was off the video?
I do not.
In addition to your work assisting with the Fitbit, did you at some point later in this investigation become involved in downloading and analyzing additional phones subsequent to the arrest of George Burch?
Yes, I did.
And actually, even, I guess, prior to Mr. Burch's arrest, when the sheriff's office became aware of Mr. Burch, were you provided with a copy of a download of Mr. Burch's phone that had been done by the Green Bay Police Department?
Yes, I was.
Were you asked to analyze that download?
Yes, I was.
And was that done by Green Bay PD in a software that you were familiar with?
Yes.
Was it also Cellbrite?
Yes, it was.
What were you looking for when you were analyzing the download of Mr. Burch's phone?
Initially, we were looking for anything in the time frame of the night of the 20th into the morning hours of the 21st, whether it be calls, texts, internet history, any kind of location data available from that device.
First of all, internet history. Did you actually view internet history on Mr. Burch's phone from the time frame of this homicide?
Yes, I did.
Was there anything of note?
There was repeated visits to articles in regards to this case.
When you say repeated, do you know approximately how many times Mr. Burch looked up information on this case shortly after it happened?
About 64.
Now, when you talk about internet browser history, can you describe a little bit about what that is?
Yes, so the internet browser on a phone allows you to go and visit websites that are on the internet.
And when you see browser history, what are you actually viewing? Is that sites that were viewed? Are you actually seeing what he's actively searching? What is the...
You will see the link that was accessed along with the date and time that it was accessed, along with if there's a heading to the website, such as the article title, that would all be viewed in the Cellbrite report.
Does each of those links that's viewed represent a separate click or a separate view on that particular page?
It does.
Analyst Bailing, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 168. Can you describe what that document is?
This is a report generated out of the Cellbrite software of the internet browser history in regards to website links related to the case from Mr. Burch's phone.
And that is in reverse chronological order, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So the most recent views are on top,
That's correct.
and the last date visited according to this report is which date?
6/6 of 2016.
And the first view, which would be actually number 64 then on this report, what is the date of that view?
5/22/2016.
At what time?
5:19 a.m.
And the times listed on there, are those in Central Standard Time?
They are.
Your Honor, I would move for admission of this exhibit.
Any objection to 168, subject to cross?
No, thank you.
168 is received.
I would request the ability to publish this exhibit for the jury.
Let's publish 168 on the screen.
And Your Honor, because it is in reverse chronological order, we would like to start publication beginning on page 3, which is the last page of the report.
All right, so this will be, for the record, this will be page 3 of Exhibit 168.
Correct.
All right.
And the writing is obviously very small on this particular exhibit. Is the title the same for numbers 55 through 64, which is all of the items on page 3?
Yes, they are.
And what is the title of the article?
Well, you heard it there. George Burch looked up information about this case 64 times on the internet. shortly after this happened. Now, the defense will certainly say that he was forced at gunpoint to bury the body, so of course he was looking it up. But the question, of course, is then, why didn't he tell anyone about that? We are going to take a break. We are out of time. Jesse Weber, thank you. Great to see you.
Great seeing you.
The great Aaron Keller is up in the chair next. Stay with us.